Hello everyone, today we'll continue chapter 5 talking about income elasticity of demand, cross price elasticity of demand, and price elasticity of supply. So if you still remember in the last part we talked about price elasticity of demand, I mentioned that actually we can ignore the sign of the price elasticity of demand, right? Because that will be easier for us to compare with the price elasticity of demand. However, when we talk about income elasticity or cross price elasticity, sign is very important. So we cannot ignore the sign. We cannot ignore the sign in the income elasticity and cross price elasticity. Okay. So first, let's see. As far as we know, when we learn from chapter 4, we know that change in income will actually affect consumers' demand for products, right? So it will shift the demand curve, right? But we never know how much. We know that, okay, we have, when we talk about income, then we know that when the income increase, some products we might buy more, right? But there are some products we might buy fewer or less, right? Therefore, for income elasticity of demand, it will tell us how much will affect your demand when your income changes. So let's see how we can get the income elasticity. So this is the formula for us to compute income elasticity. We know it will equal the percentage change in quantity divided the percentage change in income. Okay, so this is what I always write income elasticity. I use I here represents for income. Okay, will equal percentage change in demand. Okay, in demand divide the percentage change in income. Okay, so if the questions tells you the percentage change directly, you can use this formula. Okay, if not, you can also use the midpoint methods. Okay, so here I will also introduce the midpoint methods. Very similar to the price elasticity of demand. Okay, so midpoint methods here we need to get the percentage change in demand will equal the differences with the demand divide the average of demand. Okay, so from this part, we can get the percentage change in demand. And for the percentage change in income, similar, okay? We will use the income difference between 2 points, okay? Divide the average of income. So from this part, we can compute the percentage change in demand and percentage change in income respectively, and then put them into this formula, okay? Put them into this formula to compute the income elasticity. So this is two-way, okay, for us to compute income elasticity. Either you can just use this formula if the question tells you the percentage change directly. If not, you need to use the midpoint methods, okay? Use the midpoint methods to compute the percentage change in demand and percentage change in income respectively, and then put it in this formula to compute the income elasticity. All right, let's see. This is the way for us to compute for income elasticity. And one thing I want to emphasize is for income elasticity, sign is very important. Okay, so here, the sign of income elasticity is important. For example, you might see, okay, when we talk about income elasticity in chapter 4, when we talk about income, we mentioned there are two types of products. One is for normal goods, right? Do you still remember how we define for normal goods? The normal goods means income increase, you buy more, right? So income increase, demand increase, right? Such as like seafood or like their steak. We also talk about inferior goods, right? So can you just recall what you have learned about inferior goods? Inferior goods means when your income increase, you buy fewer of this type of the products. So you can see here from this type of the inferior goods and normal goods, we notice if for the normal goods, income increase, demand increase. So the relationship here is positive, right? Which will make our income elasticity become positive, right? Percentage change in demand divide percentage change in income. They are moving in the same direction. So the income elasticity should be positive. However, for inferior goods, income increase, you buy fewer products. So they are negatively related, right? When they are negatively related, which means income elasticity here should be negative, okay? So you can see when we talk about income elasticity, sign has a special meaning, okay? Positive means it's normal goods. Negative here means inferior goods. Understand? So when we talk about income elasticity, remember to keep the sign, okay? The sign here is very important. Don't ignore the sign. So this is what we say, demand for normal goods is positively related to income. Therefore, increase the income will actually shift the demand curve to the right hand side, right? And then increase the demand for normal goods. However, the demand for inferior goods actually is negatively, okay, negatively related to income, and an increase in income will actually shift the demand curve to the left hand side, reduce the demand for inferior goods. So in the income elasticity, okay, as I mentioned again, okay, sign is very important because it will tell you either the goods is normal goods or inferior goods. Understand? So this part comes from income elasticity. For the normal goods, we notice here, income elasticity should be positive. For inferior goods, income elasticity should be negative. Now let's look at one practice question. Suppose that this person, okay, receive a pay increase at work and his income increased by 20%. As a result, he decided to buy 12% less ground beef. So for ground beef is a normal good or inferior good. Now look at this question. What you can do, income increased by 20%, however, buy fewer ground beef. So I can just write it down here, okay? Income, this part, percentage change income, positive 20%, right? However, the percentage change in demand for ground beef, negative 12%, right? So can you compute the income elasticity? Income elasticity here will just equal percentage change in demand divide percentage change in income, which will be negative 12%, divide positive 20%, which is negative 0.6. So you can see here the sign negative, right? So the negative sign here will tell us ground beef for this person is an inferior goods. Okay, so we need to put inferior goods. Okay, is an inferior good. Understand? All right, now let's move on to talk about cross price elasticity. So when we talk about cross price elasticity, actually it related to what we have learned in chapter 4, the related goods. And in chapter 4, actually we talk about two types of related goods. Do you still remember what two types of the related goods? One related good we talk about is substitutes, right? And another related goods we talk about is complements. So let's see, for the cross price elasticity, let's first talk about substitutes. For substitutes, you can think about the example, okay? Very popular example, Coke versus Pepsi. Okay, so for Coke versus Pepsi, then I would like to say if Coke price, I put Coke price increase. If Coke price increase, first, the quantity demand for Coke would decrease, right? Consumers will buy fewer Coke. And at the same time, consumers might switch to buy more Pepsi, right? So it will result to the demand of Pepsi increase. So you can see here there is a relationship. When Coke price increase, the demand for Pepsi increase. They are positively related, right? So substitutes, for the substitutes, the cross price elasticity should be positive. Okay, so this is from one example. Then let's talk about complements. For complements, I would like to talk about for example, still use the food as an example. Let's see, cream cheese, bagel and cream cheese. Okay, bagel versus cream cheese. Okay, so here I would like to say if bagel's price increase, okay, similar. Okay, bagel's price increase, consumers first it will buy fewer bagel, right? Because bagel become expensive. Now consumer can switch to buy other products, right? So bagel's quantity demand decrease. As far as we know, bagel and cream cheese always be consumed together, okay, because they're always eating together. So consumers might also buy fewer cream cheese. So the demand for cream cheese would decrease, right? Then you can see when we talk about complements, bagel's price increase but resulted in cream cheese demand decrease. So they are negatively related, right? You can see here for complements, they are negatively related. We can predict the cross price elasticity should be negative. Okay, so this is why I say when we talk about cross price elasticity or income elasticity, sign are very important because the sign here will tell you the relationship between these two products. Either they are substitutes or complements. If the cross price elasticity is positive, then these two products they are substitutes. If cross price become negative, then these two products should be complements. Okay. So change in the price of the complements or substitutes will also affect the demand. This is what we have learned in chapter 4, okay? So cross-price elasticity of demand actually measures the responsiveness of the demand for one good to a change in the price of the related goods. So how we can compute for cross-price elasticity? We already know the sign here will tell us the relation between these two goods, but how we compute for the cross-price elasticity? Let me show you the example. Let me show you the formulas here, okay? So I will write down the formula here. For the cross price elasticity, I'll just write it down here, okay? For a cross price elasticity, okay? We assume there are two goods, okay? Good X and good Y. Because they are cross price elasticity, we should have two goods, okay? Good X and good Y. So the cross price elasticity of good X, cross price elasticity of good X will equal to the percentage change in the demand of good X. The demand of good X divides the percentage in change in the price of good Y. Understand? So this is the way that we compute for cross price elasticity. We have the percentage change in good X demand divide the percentage change in good Y's price. So this will be the cross price elasticity between X and Y. Understand? Between X and Y. If the questions tells you the percentage change directly, okay, you can use this formula. If not, you should also use the midpoint methods. Okay, so I will show you how to get the midpoint methods to compute a cross price elasticity. So let me show the midpoint methods for cross price elasticity. It's a little bit tedious, but you can just break it down into several parts that will be easier for you to understand. Okay. So as far as we know from the cross price elasticity between x and y, okay, it will equal to the percentage change in good X demand divides percentage change in good Y's price. Okay? So if the questions tells you the percentage change directly, you can use this formula. If not, you should also use the midpoint methods. Okay? So for midpoint methods, you first need to compute the percentage change in the demand of good X. It will equal to the differences between good X demand divides the average of good X quantity. Okay? X here will represent for good X. Okay? And the percentage change in the price of good Y will equal to the differences between good Y's price divides the average. Oh, this one should be times 100%. Okay, so this is the way that we compute the percentage change in the demand of the good X and the percentage change in the price of the good Y. So for example, here, you should use the midpoint methods, okay? The midpoint here comes from the average. This should be the average of the good X demand and the average of good Y's price, okay? So this is the way for us to compute the cross price elasticity. So for substitutes, as I just mentioned, okay, the cross price elasticity should be positive, okay? However, for complements, the cross price elasticity should be negative. And then I will give you one practice question. Which of the following could be the cross price elasticity of demand of two goods that are complements? If those two goods they are complements, then the cross price elasticity should be positive or negative. They should be negative, right? So let's look at the options. A, negative 1.3, that should be the right answer. B, 0, no. C, positive zero point 0.8. So only option A is correct because option A has a negative cross price elasticity, and which means these two goods, they are complements. Understand? So one thing I want to emphasize again, when we talk about the price elasticity of demand, I'll just write down something here, okay? When we talk about price elasticity of demand, okay? We can ignore the sign. We can ignore the sign, okay? However, this is the cross price elasticity of demand. We can ignore the sign. When we talk about income elasticity of demand, we cannot ignore the sign because if it's positive, it means normal goods. If it's negative, it means inferior goods, right? And when we talk about cross price elasticity of demand, cross price, okay, cross price elasticity, the sign should also has a special meaning. If it's positive, which means these two goods, they are substitutes. Okay? If it's negative, that means those goods are complements. So you can notice those are the three very important elasticity, okay, from demand side. Now we will move on to talk about price elasticity of supply. Okay, price elasticity of supply actually very similar to price elasticity of demand. So for this part, I will just go through the slides quickly. First, for price elasticity of supply, it measures how much quantity supply responds to the price change. Okay, how much the quantity supply responds to the supply, sorry, how much the quantity supply responds to the price change. So this is the way that we can compute for the price elasticity of supply. So always use E subscript to S, okay? Percentage change in quantity supply divides the percentage change in price, okay? So here we can also use the midpoint methods. And it measures sellers' sensitivity or responsiveness to the price change. Again, we can still use the midpoint methods to compute the percentage change. Okay, so here I will not emphasize the midpoint methods because the midpoint methods I already explained several times. Then for the price elasticity of supply, we can see how we can compute it. Okay, so look at this example in this graph. So in this graph, we have the price increase by 8%, okay? And then the quantity supply increased by 16%. So from this example, can you tell me what's the price elasticity of supply? We know that quantity supply increased by 16%, right? And the percentage change in price will be increased by 8%. So put those numbers into this formula. You will use the elasticity of supply equal 16% divide 8%, which is 2, right? So here it's easier for us to get a price elasticity of supply equal 2. Now let's move on. When we talk about in demand side, we mentioned that are different type of the demand curve, right? In the supply side, very similar. We also have different type of the supply curve. So for example, the slope of the supply curve actually is closely related to the price elasticity of supply. And the sum of the rule here, the rule of the thumb here is the same as from the demand side. The flatter the curve, okay, the flatter the curve, the bigger the elasticity. The steep the curve, okay, the steep the curve, the smaller the elasticity. So let's look at 5 different supply curve. The first case, okay, like the demand side, is a very extreme case. So you can see here from this example, we have the supply curve is vertical, right? So vertical means there is nothing change in quantity supply, nothing change in quantity supply. So look at the formula. We know now the denominator, the percentage change in quantity supply always equal to 0. Therefore, 0 divide anything will also equal 0. Even the price here increased by 10%, nothing changed in quantity supply, right? Therefore, the elasticity here in a perfectly inelastic case will equal 0. So in this case, perfectly inelastic case, the supply curve is a vertical line. Nothing changed in quantity. Now let's look at this case. So in this case, you can notice now the supply curve here is a little bit steep, right? It has a steep slope. Therefore, we would like to say from this example, we have the price increased by 10%. However, you can notice the percentage change in quantity is less than 10%, right? So based on this formula, we have the numerator change less than 10%. However, denominator change by 10%, which will make our price elasticity of supply less than 1. Okay, so if it's inelastic, we have the price elasticity of supply less than 1, and you can see the supply curve is steep. Okay, the slope is steep. Now move on to the third case. We would like to call this one as unit elastic. So in unit elastic, it's very special because the percentage change in supply, in quantity supply and percentage change in price is exactly the same. So all equal 10%. Therefore, we have the unit elastic. Elastic will equal 1. Okay, so this will be the third special supply curve. Now let's look at if the supply curve is elastic, what will happen? So compare with the second graph and this graph, you can notice in this graph, the supply curve is flatter, right? So when the supply curve is flatter, you can notice the price increased by 10%, okay, the same as before. However, the quantity supply will increase more than 10%, maybe 15% in this case. Therefore, if the supply curve is flatter, okay, is flatter, or what we say is with flatter slope, then we will notice the price elasticity of supply should be larger than 1, okay? Should be larger than 1. So when elasticity larger than 1, it means the supply will be elastic. Now, last case will be also extreme case. So you can see from this graph, now the supply curve is horizontal line, right? When it becomes a horizontal line, what happens? Nothing change in price. So the percentage change in price will equal 0. So you can see from this formula, something divided 0 will equal infinity, right? Will become infinity. Therefore, we will say this case will be very, or we say it's perfectly elastic, perfectly elastic. So something divided 0 always equal infinity, okay? So in this case, it's perfectly elastic. Okay, so here we talk about 5 different shape of the supply curve, right? Extreme case, either is vertical line or horizontal line, right? We also talk about when the supply curve is steep or supply curve is flatter, okay? So these are very similar to the demand curve. I will not talk those parts in details. Let's move on to the next part about the determinants of supply elasticity. So the price of the supply elasticity actually depends on the flexibility that sellers can change the amount of the goods they produce. So the more easier the sellers can adjust their supply, then the price elasticity of supply will be bigger. So for example, okay, let's see. The supply of the beachfront property. Is it easy? Is it easy for the seller to change the supply of the beachfront property? Probably not, because the land of the beachfront is limited, right? So even the price change a lot. However, the supply of the beachfront property should be limited because of the land or the area of the beachfront area, okay? Therefore, for the beachfront property, we would like to say the supply elasticity will be really inelastic. Let's look at another example. Supply of the manufactured goods such as books, cars, or TVs. So when we talk about supply of manufactured goods, we might think about, okay, for those goods, it might be easier to change, to adjust the quantity supply rather than the beachfront property, right? However, there is another thing you also need to consider is the time, okay? So in most of the markets, a key determinant of price elasticity of supply is the time being considered. So for example, in the short run, firms cannot easily to change the size of the factories, which means it will be hard for them to change their supply in the short run. However, in the long run, then factories can close or expand it, right? So we would like to say in the long run, the supply elasticity is bigger in the short run, okay? Now let's look at the final parts of this chapter. We would like to talk about one economy case, okay? OPEC. Have you ever heard this organization before? And in this example, we would like to talk about why did OPEC afford to keep the oil price high, okay? Although we know these days the crude oil price is really high. So let's see. Many of the most disruptive events happen in the world economy today or over or past, okay? It actually originated from the market of crude oil, okay? And do you know OPEC? So OPEC is the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Originally, OPEC has 5 countries, okay, including Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi, and Venezuela. Okay, those 5 countries. And currently, OPEC including 13 countries. So those 13 countries join in those organizations. They actually controlled nearly 44% of the whole of the world oil exports. Okay, and it also controls 81.5% of the oil reserves. So you can see this organization is like monopoly in the oil production, right? So in 1970s, these countries, or we say the countries joined together, okay, they agreed to reduce the amount of the oil they supply in order to increase the price of the oil. So that makes sense, right? So those in 1970s, those five countries originally, okay, five countries, they joined together and then they agree to reduce the oil supply, and which will definitely increase the oil price. So from 1973 to 1974, you can see the price of the crude oil increased more than 50%. A few years later, OPEC did the same thing again, okay, because they noticed once they cut down the oil supply, it actually bring a huge benefits, a huge profits. Therefore, a few years later, they did it again, okay, they agreed to reduce the oil production and then went to see if the oil price will increase dramatically or not. So from 1978 to 1981, the percentage of the oil, oh sorry, the price of the oil approximately double. So it works again, right? Then OPEC will find it very hard for them to maintain such a high oil price. Even they notice, okay, the oil price increased, but it's hard for them to maintain the oil price at that high level. So from 1982 to 1985, you can see the price of the oil steadily decline about 10% per year. And in 1990, the price of the oil was back to where it began in 1970. So the question here is, at the beginning, those five countries joined together to cut down the oil supply, right? They tried to increase the oil price, and then it made it, right? It succeeded at the beginning because from 1973 to 1974, oil price increased by 50%. And then they did it again, so the oil price doubled from 1978 to 1979. But 2 years later, 3 years later, oil price going down steadily. And even in 1990s, that will be 20 years later, the oil price back to what we have in 1970, right? So the question here is, you can see the OPEC episode of 1970s and 1980s show how supply and demand actually can behave differently in the short run and in the long run. Okay, so let's see how we can use what we have learned to analyze this topic. In the short run, we would like to say both supply and demand for crude oil were relatively inelastic. So what happens? In the short run, supply and the demand for crude oil are negatively inelastic. So let me show you the graph here. If I treat this as the price, this is the quantity, right? If it's inelastic, then the demand curve should be really steep, right? And how about the supply curve? The supply curve also steep, right? So this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve because in the short run, they are relatively inelastic. Then when OPEC decided to reduce the oil supply, what happens? If they join together to reduce the oil supply, then the oil supply curve will shift to which direction? Will shift to the left hand side, right? And the result in a very high price because the original price maybe at this level, right? But now, once they cut down the oil supply, we notice the price increased dramatically. Okay, so you can see price is inelastic. Demand is also inelastic in the short run. Therefore, you can see in the short run, the demand and supply curve were relatively steep, right? And when they cut down the supply, you can notice the price increased dramatically, okay? 50% or even double. However, in the long run, both supply and demand will become relatively elastic because people can find the other exporters of the crude oil, right? They can switch to other countries to buy crude oil, or they can use the other new energy technology. Okay, therefore, in the long run, we would like to say supply become elastic because the producers of the oil producer of the oil outside OPEC, okay, they respond to the high price, their they increase the oil production, right? For the demand, consumers can switch to buy other efficient efficient energy cars, right? Therefore, you can see in the long run what happens. I will just draw a graph here. I put the price, put the Q here. In the long run, the demand will become elastic. The supply will become elastic as well. Therefore, once the OPEC cut down, this is the original price, okay? So once the OPEC cut down the oil supply, it will still shift this supply curve to the left-hand side, right? Still shift to the left-hand side, but you can notice the price cannot increase dramatically as before. This is short run, and this is happening in the long run, right? So you can see from what we have learned about demand and supply in the short run and in the long run, the different elasticity, it actually can help us to explain why OPEC failed to keep the price of the oil always at a high level. So you can see in the long run, both demand and supply for oil will become relatively elastic, okay? And which will make the price, the demand and supply curve relatively flatter, okay? And it will not make the price increase dramatically as before. Okay, so from this case, we can know when OPEC countries agrees to reduce their production of oil, actually shifts the supply curve to the left-hand side. That's definitely true. Even though each OPEC member sold less of the oil, okay, but you can see the price increased by such you can see the price increase in the short run is dramatically. However, in the long run, it will just has a very small increase in price, right? So in the long run, supply and demand are more elastic. Therefore, OPEC's coordinated reduction in supply prove less profitable in the long run. Okay, so this is the way that we can use our demand and supply combined with elasticity to analyze some basic economic situation, economic issues. Okay, so this analysis will show us why OPEC succeeded in maintaining a high oil price only in the short run, but not in the long run. And thus also explain why, after 20 years of the jointly reduction of oil production, the oil price back to its original level in 1970. Okay, now I know this chapter has very intensive contents, okay, and then it also combined with many different graphs, mathematics, formulas, right? So here, let me just do some summary. Elasticity measures the responsiveness of quantity supply or quantity demand response to the price, okay, response to the price change, response to the income change, or response to other products price changes. Price elasticity of demand equals the percentage change in quantity demand divided the percentage change in price. And we will also use the midpoint methods to compute the price elasticity of supply, okay? And for price elasticity of supply, okay, we ignore the sign. If it's larger than 1, we said this one is elastic, okay, for price elasticity of demand, okay, demand. If it's equal 1, we'll say is unit, okay? Unit elastic. If it's less than 1, then we will say is inelastic. This is also happened in price elasticity of supply. Okay, we ignore the sign here. For the price elasticity of demand, okay, if it's positive, oh sorry, if it's larger than one, which means, so I will here write it down again. If it's larger than one, which means it is elastic, right? Therefore, increase the price will actually reduce the quantity supply, the quantity demand more. Therefore, when you increase the price for those elastic products, it will make the revenue decrease. Okay. If it's inelastic, then increase the price actually will bring more revenue. Okay. So this will tells you the relationship between price elasticity of demand and the total revenue. So here I say when demand is inelastic, total revenue will increases when price increases. However, when demand is elastic, then total revenue will decrease when the price increase. Demand is less elastic in the short run, okay? And it also will be inelastic for necessities and then for the products in the broadly defined markets. And with fewer substitutes, we also notice the price elasticity of demand will become inelastic. So for price elasticity of supply, it will equal to the percentage change in quantity supply divided percentage change in price. And we also talk about the price elasticity of supply could be positive, could be larger than one, which means is elastic, could be less than one, which means is inelastic. And the price elasticity of supply will be larger in the long run rather than in the short run, because in the long run, firms and corporations, they have more time to adjust their production response to the price change. For the income elasticity of demand, okay, for income elasticity of demand, I emphasize again, sign is very important. When the income elasticity, for the income elasticity, if it's positive, which means they are normal goods. If the negative means it's inferior goods. And then for the cross price elasticity, okay, for the cross price elasticity, emphasize again, if the cross price elasticity positive, which means these two goods, they are substitutes. If it's negative, which means those two goods, they are complements. Okay, they are complements. So I think those are some contents that we have learned in this chapter. Okay. So thank you so much. I know it's not an easy chapter for you to learn, but I think after I explain those concepts in the lecture slides, I hope you can understand. Thank you.